afternoon, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome to our workshop on planning for your online summer course. We are excited to share with you some best practices and ideas for how to plan for and just make decisions about your summer 2020 course. And I am Stephanie, and I am the manager of professional learning in the Office of Distance Education and E-Learning.
I'm Sarah Holt. I'm an instructional designer at OD as well.
Hi, I'm Queenie Chow. I'm a program analyst at OD.
So let's talk a little bit about what our outcomes are for this session, as well as our agenda. So by the end of our 90 minutes together today, we hope that you'll have a pretty good sense of what the university's expectations are for summer 2020 courses. We will give you opportunities to reflect on ways to create a manageable online course for this summer. Emphasis on manageable. We hope that you can make decisions about the best practices for your course. And we will also talk about ways to interact. So we're hoping that you can at least start thinking about how to create ways to interact and support your students in this course. And then at the end, of course, we'll talk about further resources. So we're hoping by in 90 minutes from now that you'll know exactly where to go for additional assistance for your teaching. So the agenda today looks like this. We are going to start with some considerations about what it's going to be like for you and your students for this summer courses, including the 8 expectations that have been set by the university. And Sarah will go ahead and share that part for us. And then we'll separate the rest of the bulk of the workshop around these 4 kind of instructional decisions. So the first is how to share materials with your students. The second is including practice and application in your course. The third is including engagement and reflection in your course. And the last is about instructor presence and the importance of that in any online course. We will be taking questions through the Zoom chat. Queenie, maybe do you want to talk a little bit about how we'll use the chat in this workshop?
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and paste something into the chat. So you should probably see kind of an orange flashing somewhere on your screen. If you grab your mouse and go kind of to the bottom middle of your screen, you'll see a little speech bubble that says chat. So if the chat's not already up, just click on that icon. It should show up there for you. I'll be sharing a couple of links and answering your questions that you type into there throughout the session if you would like to. Don't feel like you need to engage with the chat at this particular moment, but later on we might have some reflection questions where we're kind of pulling the audience a little bit and would love to hear from you. Again, not completely required, but it is a good way to interact with us there. Kind of with your mouse toward the bottom left of your screen, you'll also see kind of a video icon. Feel free to share your webcam with us. You don't have to, but it's nice to see your faces. We have everyone muted for this workshop today, and that just helps us kind of keep things moving along. So don't worry if you're not unable to, or if you're not able to unmute, but we'll just be checking the chat for any feedback that you have for us today.
Thank you, Queenie. So we will have opportunities built in to answer your questions, but we know that you may have some that come up along the way. So feel free to put them in the chat, and then we may not get them until our questions section. We will have one after each of the 4 kind of decision areas that we are going to talk about, including some space at the very end of the workshop for you to ask any additional questions. But we also have built into this workshop times for reflection and planning. And those are going to be times where we'll say that you can either write down, Queenie, do you still, there you go. So Queenie went ahead and put the slides up there. Do you have, there you go. So the box folder and the link that you have gives you the slides, but also a worksheet that you're welcome to quickly print off if you have the printer near you, or you could just open it up and use it as, it's a Word doc that you can type into, or just simply take some mental notes or write down on a piece of paper next to you. We just want to give you some reflective questions and planning questions along the way so that you can process the information that we're talking about and start the planning process. So this is just the beginning. We are going to have every detail for you to create the entire course, but we want to get you started so that you know where else at the end, we'll give you those resources, but you know where else to go to continue on with that planning process. So again, you can just think about those reflection questions, you can write them on your own, or you can use that worksheet. And then at the end, of course, we'll go over some of the resources here at the university. So let's find out a little bit more on who you are. We have a poll. All right.
Yes, we do.
Thank you. So it's just one easy question. Let us know which statement best describes you and the course that you're planning. So we have a sense of how many of you have taught already, how new this course is, and how new online teaching is for you. Let's take a moment to answer that. And if you have other as your answer, go ahead and put the answer into the chat.
We've got about 20 people in here today. We've got about 15 of them answered. I'll give it a few more seconds here to let some more people read through and answer that. Okay, 18 out of 20. All right, a few more seconds. I'm gonna go ahead and end this poll, and then I'll share the results back out with everybody.
Thank you. Okay, so it looks like the majority of folks have not taught this summer, and you're not going to be teaching this summer, and you are going to be supporting other instructors. We did this workshop last Friday, and we had almost about the same number of people, so you are probably in the same boat as us, the three of us from OD, where you're supporting others, so hopefully you'll gain some information here that you can share out. We are recording this workshop, and we will have this as well as other resources on our Keep Teaching page so that you can direct them to this if you think this would help them. Okay, and then we have 5 folks who have only taught this course face-to-face in the past. That is not surprising. I think we had very similar last week. And 2 of you are already currently teaching this course remotely, meaning you're teaching it right now. In the spring, it's just about over, and you probably had to quickly whip up an online version of your course that was probably more like emergency remote teaching rather than designing an actual online course. So we'll take some of the things that you learned to do those remote teaching courses, and we'll add to it for the summer. Let's see, we have some others here. So some of you taught this course in a hybrid format before. This may be a brand new course for you, completely in any format. So we've got a lot of range here on how folks are engaging with today's workshop. So we are going to be asking you those reflection questions. For those of you who are supporting others, think about the kinds of answers that you may get from your colleagues who you'll be supporting. So even if you're not thinking about your own course, think about what others would say and maybe what challenges they may have. If you have taught this course only face-to-face, this will be a nice opportunity for you to start that planning process. Okay, so we found out a little bit about who you are, a little bit about this course, or how you support others. We want to start by thinking about how we're all feeling today. And that could be about how you feel about your current teaching load that you've got right now. It could be about what the summer is going to be. It could be just personally how you're feeling. But in the chat, we'd like for you to give us just a one-word, couple words response to how are you feeling today. And we start off with dread right away. Thank you, Monica. Yeah, I know, busy. We've got a couple overwhelmed, but we do have a couple of hopefuls and feeling pretty positive, feeling good. Oh yeah, if you just finished grading, you're probably feeling pretty good and also exhausted. Yeah, so we've got a lot of overwhelmed. This does not surprise any of us. We hope that this workshop will help, and this is the main way that we organize this, is to help you not feel overwhelmed. So we hope that you will feel a sense of structure about how to go about planning for this course, but it doesn't feel so overwhelming and unmanageable. Okay, so we're going to think about what are some considerations for this summer coming up. They're going to be very similar to what you and your students have been experiencing already in the spring term. So those stressors of a global health crisis have not really gone away. So we may have more of our students who have families who are sick. We may have students that are sick themselves. They are still going to be at home, most likely with lots of chaos in the background, trying to carve out time for them to focus on their course. And all of those things are still there. Just the uncertainty of the world and where we're at right now just adds to that stressor for all of us. You may also have chaos around you and dogs jumping and barking and cats walking on your laptop and kids or neighbor kids screaming. So we're all dealing with this still. It's probably not going to go away. We may still have students who are challenged with their access to technology, and particularly the Wi-Fi. They may not have strong enough Wi-Fi to actually, for example, watch live streamed Zoom course sessions. I personally have been having issues. Queenie's had issues. We've all had issues, right? So the students are not alone in that, but know that that's something we have to think about. Putting your course online, truly an online course, is going to be a learning curve. And there's a lot of learning curve for your students, but also for you. So we want to talk a little bit today about kind of the big picture things to help you, but we know that there's still going to be a learning curve with specific tools. And how do I actually make that thing work? I saw a question earlier, like, how do I do polls? So a lot of those technical questions we have videos for. We have other workshops that are recorded. We have lots of consultation options for you. So we'll direct you there. Because we're all here to support you. And that's a really important message that the three of us have for you, is that this is the start of this conversation, but there are many other places and ways to get that support as you move along and deal with that learning curve. And so not only do you need support, but your students will need support. And they'll need support in balancing how they're going to manage taking this course online, and they may need support about whatever else they're dealing with in their life. So we'll talk a little bit about how to add that in. And we also know that as you're designing these summer courses and adjusting them to an online format, that you're likely going to have to make some difficult decisions, both about content and activities, and maybe even assignments and exams. So we know that, and we're hoping that today's session can help you sort through that decision-making process. So let's get started with our first reflection. So every time you see a screen where half of it is black and the other half has questions, these are our reflection or our planning questions. And this is a time for you not to write in the chat. Those are the big teal screens. This is the time to either write on that worksheet that we gave you a link to, or just write on a piece of paper or think about it. So for your situation, what potential struggles do you think your students will have for this upcoming summer 2020 term? And then what potential struggles will you have? And I'm going to give you, I'm going to time this so we have like about 2 minutes for each reflection. So just take some time to think about that, and I will call us back here in 2 minutes. I do need some music in the background. We talked about that last time. Okay, so we're not going to ask you to share that, but we are going to ask you to share in the chat this question. So take those reflective answers that you had about struggles for you and your students, and we're just going to put those aside as something to consider as potential hurdles and challenges that we need to design for. So put those aside. Let's kind of come back to your summer course and thinking about what are you most concerned about. And it may be some of those struggles or something else. So in the chat, if you wouldn't mind very briefly sharing with us, what are you most concerned about for this summer? Yeah, we're already getting student engagement, which is great because we're going to talk about that today. So we've got some content, we've got a format. Yeah, thank you actually for mentioning about fall courses. So today we're talking specifically about summer courses, but the 4 main best practices that we're going to talk about are for any online course. So I'm glad you're here. Yeah, we've got assessments, we've feeling connected. We've got a lot of things about the lab. So we've got a lot happening here that we're concerned about. I think we'll touch on most of those today, and then we'll make sure to get you in the right place for additional resources. Okay, so we don't want to end on just what your concerns are. We want to think about what are you most excited about before we actually get into the best practices. If you can share in the chat, what are you most excited about for this summer? The same thing we're worried about, engaging with students. If we can make that happen, that's a good thing. Yeah, I was going to say weather too. Yeah, we've seen a lot of this so far. Like there's some excitement about actually improving a course, learning new skills that you hadn't had before, and learning some tools. Yeah, some of you are teaching, because it's summer, teaching smaller classes, which in and of itself will make it more manageable. So good, we have lots of things that we're excited for. So we're going to take that excitement and energy, and we're going to start moving into what are the things we need to know about summer 2020. So I'm going to start with just some reminders to make sure we're all on the same page about what we are going to be doing for summer 2020 here at The Ohio State University. So I know you already know this, but the schedule is adjusted. So we're working from May 13 to July 31 if you've got a full summer term course, and finals will be August 3 through 5. We are, as a university, putting lectures, labs, discussion sections, and seminars in a virtual environment. So we're putting all of those as online courses. There are some other experiences that they're still working on, but we know for sure that if you're teaching one of these, it's going to be online. And we are not using the pass, no pass grading system, which I'm sure, again, you all know, but just as a reminder, we're doing this using the traditional grading system. What I hope you all know is that if you're designing your course for the summer, and we'll find out what's going to happen in autumn, for those of you who are planning for autumn, we'll find that out a little bit later in the summer, I hope soon, in the next few weeks. But for summer courses, we have to submit the course for approval as an online offering. And we have to do that by May 1st. That's coming up. So hopefully you've gotten some things started, and this workshop will help you kind of tweak and adjust some things, and that you're ready to go to submit this course on May 1st. And what you need to submit is what we call kind of 8 expectations or assurances, and Sarah's going to kind of walk us through that here in a second. And those that subset of 8 expectations and good practices are required. So that's why we wanted to make sure we cover them today. So Sarah, do you want to take it from here and talk about those expectations?
Yes. So as Stephanie was mentioning, this is not an exhaustive list of everything that will make an online class great. So my normal job is, as an instructional designer, to work with instructors to build amazing online courses. And normally that takes an entire semester worth of labor. There are lots of folks chipping in, brainstorming, working together. And so it's an immense amount of labor to make a course that is innovative or exciting. And that's not really what we're asking you to do here. We're asking you to do a much smaller subset of those practices that are manageable, but will also create a quality learning experience. So we're just going to kind of go through. I'm not going to read you the specific language for all of these. Sorry, I have 8-year-olds with an iPad. It's dangerous. But I wanted to kind of clarify, we know that not everybody is familiar with this language and that these guidelines are not always completely clear for someone reading some of this language for the first time. So first of all, you're expected in your summer online course to have regular and substantive academic interactions. And what that means is that you can't just preload the entire semester's worth of material and then let it run itself. So that would be considered by the guidelines for like the Higher Learning Commission standards to be a correspondence course. So in this online course, just like in your regular face-to-face version of the course, you do need to have some kind of interactions with your students. Generally, that means every week, but of course you can occasionally have a time when maybe it's a research week. Just like if you were in a normal world going on conference travel and kind of, ask them to do a not meeting together week. So you can't never see them for the entire semester, but it is okay if you don't see them every single week. You can wiggle that a little bit, but you can't just let it run. We do want students to participate every week. So even if you're not going to see them or interact with them, they should be doing something in the course. Practically what that means for you is that you're not going to just publish the entire course and let everybody work at a different pace. You want to kind of keep them together as a class, working on the same kinds of materials or assignments more or less weekly. Partly you want to think about that as a way to know whether they're engaging with the material. I know that's on a lot of your minds. So just like we have scheduled course times in a face-to-face class where they're expected to show up on certain days and times weekly, you want to expect them to do something in the course at least once a week. We want these courses to be equivalent to an in-person class for the credit hours. And what that means is you're not going to make these harder or dump a ton of extra videos or readings into these classes. Just because we're all at home doesn't mean that we have like bonus extra time out of nowhere to do more work for the same amount of credit hours. But what that also means is we're not reducing the rigor. You're not going to drop all of your activities or all of your readings just because it's online. Online courses don't have to be easy piece of cake courses, right? We can expect that same rigor, even if the kinds of interactions look a little bit differently than they might. We do need to be a little bit clearer for online courses about how we expect students to engage. And what we call that is the format or their modality. So we'll talk a little bit more about what some of your choices are there in a little while, but off the top of mind, you really want to consider, do they have to show up for some kind of a synchronous interaction with you? And if so, when and how often? And using what technology? Are they going to Zoom together once a week? Do they need to be in a live discussion board? Or like breakout groups in a small group or with the whole class? Or can this all be done asynchronously with a self-paced format online? We want to make that really clear. We also want to make really clear whatever your policies about academic integrity are in the syllabus. So for everybody who has taught in person at Ohio State, you know that we have a sort of boilerplate academic integrity statement that we put in about COAM and about expecting integrity. And usually we just copy and paste that in the syllabus. And when we're learning online, we need to make that even a little bit more clear and think about specifically what counts as collaboration, where and when do you want citations, and when and where they're allowed to do open book or using other resources for the course. If you were going to give a quiz or a discussion in class, you may not need to make those kinds of policies quite as explicit because you would be in the room and say, oh, okay, everybody put your notes away. Or could you guys please quiet down in the back and not discuss this? I want to hear your own thoughts. But on an online course, we need to think those things through early and express them clearly to students proactively in the syllabus. For those of you who are teaching right now in spring or who have taught online or are supporting others, this number 6 is probably really familiar to you. So what was required in spring were those Carmen Key 3 practices, having the course set up, having your syllabus, having your gradebook set up, as well as being able to use Zoom as needed. Sorry, can you skip that one slide forward? Thank you. So if you're not familiar with those, the first place you want to go after this workshop is to the Keep Teaching at OSU, or keepteaching.osu.edu, and get yourself familiar with those Key 3 practices. We're assuming for the rest of this workshop that you are already familiar with those, but you will need to quickly demonstrate in your approval for summer that you do have those things in place. Finally, these two are going to feel implicit. You're going to need to adapt your materials and activities for online learning. Several of you already pointed out in the chat, you have to get your labs online. You're used to doing things hands-on, and now you have to think of a different way of approaching that. You're used to doing synchronous discussions. We may need to think about how to adapt those same learning outcomes. And this is going to be the bulk of the challenge, right? So you don't have to have all of it planned out before May 1st, but you want to have started that thought process about which things are going to work online and which things you will need to adapt, and at least have the beginning of an idea of how that's going to work for you and your students. We also need to make our assignments and assessments appropriate and practicable. Functionally, what that means is they need to be able to be done online from multiple locations to address all of those challenges that Stephanie mentioned earlier. So if somebody has slow Wi-Fi, or doesn't have home Wi-Fi, or is using a less than ideal device for the kind of assignment, we need to have plan Bs in place. We can have our preferred method, but we always need to have plan Bs. So we'll talk a lot about where to plan and how to have a plan B as we go. Something that I want to draw your attention to here that you won't see in these expectations, no one is asking you to be innovative. No one is asking you to have a perfect online course. No one is asking you to have award-winning multimedia interactive 3D materials. We are not asking this to be, something that you're going to win a teaching award for. We just want you to have the learning that is essential to this course present and available and accessible to your students in a way that is not going to be crushingly overwhelming to you as an instructor. We're going to try to draw a lot of parallels between the things that you do in your face-to-face courses, for those of you who have taught either this course or other courses online, and think about how to translate those and adapt them into online spaces.
All right, this is another reflection time. And this is a reflection on your own expectations. So Sarah just covered the expectations that the university has for us, but what are our expectations for what the course may look like? So we're suggesting maybe 3, but you can pick 1 or 5 in whatever 2 minutes I give you. But what are the 3 most important things that you want your students to gain from this summer course? And that could be around a learning goal, or what the general kind of experience you want students to have. Again, this is just for yourself. You don't have to put this, and don't put it in the chat, but just think for a couple minutes. What are the most important things that you expect and what you hope your students gain? So as we go through the rest of our planning process for the summer course that you're thinking about today, we're going to keep those important things just to the side, right? We want to keep them in mind so that we can come back at the end to see you've planned can actually meet, right, those important goals or experiences that you're hoping your students have. So that's kind of a nice place to start thinking about what is it that you would want your students to generally gain from this. So Sarah mentioned those very specific 8 things that you're required to do, but that maybe feels a little overwhelming, and we don't want to add to your sense of overwhelming. Too many of you wrote that already. So in order to make this a little bit more manageable for you, we wanted to cover 4 best practices for teaching online that could work to actually help you meet the requirements. So if you do these 4 things that we're going to talk about today, you most likely will have met the expectations and requirements for your summer course. When we do this for each of these 4 parts, we'll talk about why it's important, we'll share general advice, and then Sarah will actually go through a couple of examples so you can see what it looks like. And then again, we'll have some reflection and planning time in between. So I hope that that maybe makes you feel a little less overwhelmed after those 8 things. Right, so we're going to talk about 4. So the first one is about sharing materials with students. So why are we talking about this first? So first and foremost, when students enter into a course, whether it's online or face-to-face, they need structure and they need direction. But particularly for an online course, they need that direction and structure to help them navigate, right, that course, that helps them keep attention on learning. We don't want them spending so much cognitive processing time just trying to find out where's that assignment, what's due today, what are the directions for this assignment, this exam, when do I have to do that discussion board, is that in a group? Right? We don't want them spending that time doing those kinds of seeking, right, and question asking. What we want them to pay attention to is the actual learning of the content, right? So they need those directions, the due dates, the policies that you set forth, and all of the resources that you're going to give them to help them learn to be in very explicit places. We use, obviously, Carmen as our tool, so we're going to specifically talk about in Carmen, how do you make those things explicit, and how do you put them in multiple places in Carmen so that students aren't continually trying to seek out that information. So Sarah's going to go through some general advice and then some specific examples.
Okay, so we all share materials in every course that we teach, right? You have probably some kind of lecture or times when you are explaining a concept or a theory as the expert, even if it's minimal lecture, some kind of direct instruction. We usually have some readings or some film or other kinds of media that we want our students to spend time with. And in Carmen, on an online course, the way that we do that is by sharing them in modules. And this is probably something that you've heard as a term, but what we're realizing is a lot of folks who have taught primarily face-to-face don't really have a good sense of what a module looks like. The idea is that instead of designing what's going to happen for a single course meeting, you want to kind of think in these chunks of like week to week. So what kinds of repeated activities might take place in 1 week of your course? And so these are ideally repeating this structure that really set for students an expectation of how to learn and interact and what the expectations are for your course. And so we'll show you a few examples of different ways to organize modules here in a minute. We can give them as many visual cues as possible for what to do and how to interact, because remember, as overwhelming as this is for you to design 1 or more courses right now, our students are usually taking 3 to 5, some of them 6 or 7 if they're taking several 1 credit hour courses. They're in all kinds of different courses at the same time. So when they show up to your course, you have a set of repeated interactions that they kind of can get a rhythm to. And then they know what to do when they show up in Stephanie's course or Queenie's course or Betty's course. So as they start to know what the rhythm of your class is, they're using way less cognitive load to know where to go and what to do than if they have to refigure out every week, what does Stephanie want? What does Sarah want? What does Queenie want? What does Betty want? And we can use the headers and titles in the modules to really give them very clear directions so they don't have to constantly go back to your syllabus and then find the right page for those directions. This also gives us an opportunity to kind of lump things together in meaningful ways for them. One of the nice things that Carmen lets us do is use these things we call pages to put like objects together. And it gives you an opportunity to type in or create little mini videos where we can give them context and guidance on those course materials. So frequently we see people putting the readings together into a readings page. And so that way it's not just a list of files and we just hope students go through them in the right order and know what to do with all those readings. Just as you might start a face-to-face course by saying, okay, here are all the things that you're going to read this week, and as you read them, here's what I want you to pay attention to. We can use all of these tricks and tools in Carmen to give them that context, to help guide their learning, and you still then become an important part of making sense of all of these materials. So we want to make space for you to use your expertise in these modules. We would love to encourage you, or those that you're helping, to use our Carmen template. And there's a link here that has clear directions on how to import it. I'll tell you more about what you get if you are importing that template into your course, but essentially it's a starter kit for a module with some of the main pieces most folks use in their teaching. So can we go ahead and look at some of these module examples together? If you import that template, you will get sort of a blank version of what you see here. This is a pretty simple module organization. The header up here is labeled in this course by weeks with some text and title norms that help students understand what is the big topic, what's that overarching piece or idea or theory or concept that we're going to explore that ties all these other smaller pieces of information together. You'll get an overview page where you can talk about what big questions you'll explore, what big assignments might be coming up, and kind of give them that, what you might do in the first 5 minutes of a face-to-face course where you're sort of setting the tone, explaining the learning outcomes for this week, things like that. And then you can see here there's some headers. These are the preloaded ones that come with that template I was just talking about that we know from the research on learning online are often effective. I'll show you some ways that you can tailor this. You don't have to stop here, but this is what you would get if you just downloaded the template as is. And so you can see here under Getting Information and Ideas, there's a page with all the readings clustered. Here is another page with some of the video lectures, and then in this particular week, they happen to also have a study guide. Then you'll see some space for dialogue and reflection, and some practice and application, which we'll talk about in a little bit. One thing I really wanted to draw your attention to is that those due dates appear directly right here in the module so that students don't ever have to guess, when is that due? How many points is it worth? We're not asking them to spend their time going back and forth to the syllabus because it's going to appear in multiple places. And this structure would be repeated every week so that every week they get in a habit of knowing I need to do some readings, watch a lecture, be in a discussion, and have some kind of an assignment or activity. Here's one that takes that a little bit farther and uses those basic pieces, but also I know a lot of you have recitations or lab sections, and so you can see here that in this course, the instructor has added a recitation element. And I really like this one. It's a very clever way of handling this online to get that student engagement. So normally in this class, the instructor would have a face-to-face recitation where the students would come and work through a problem set together and be able to sort of ask questions when they get stuck and do that problem solving live with the instructor or the TA. In this situation, what they have done is earlier they've asked the recitation homework to be started early in the week. He wants them to get through part of it by Wednesday. And there's a discussion board specifically for that homework that by sometime on Thursday, the students have done some trying in the homework and have questions, and they post screenshots of where they get stuck. They can ask each other questions. And then on Thursday night, he has a live Zoom session where he is able to answer those questions in the discussion board. Now, he set this for a time that he felt was accessible for him and also for his students, knowing that many of them are working professionals during the day. You could set that time for any time that would be your normal course time, or if you know your students or typically where they're coming from as a group, you don't have to set this at 6:30 at night. You don't have to do that. That just works for him. So during this session, some students are able to join live, and he will also record it. and be answering those questions from the discussion board so that even if a student can't join live, they still get their questions answered and can watch the answers later before they finally turn their homework in on Fridays. So they have a chance to watch the problem solving and fix the problems and then turn it in. Many of you are also going to maybe consider doing a synchronous session where you might do some of your lecture or have students doing breakout rooms in Zoom. This is a good solution. We'll talk a little bit more about it if you just don't have time. If you're getting multiple courses online quickly for summer and you need to minimize the amount of adjustments that you're making, that might be a good reason to choose a synchronous session. But what I want to draw your attention to here in the module is that every week that is set as part of this module structure, that students should do a reading, that they should join, and the Zoom link is right here in every single module with the date and time clearly labeled as part of those titles. So that on week 5, they don't have to go back to the syllabus. They don't have to dig around in week 1. They can see it is week 7. All I have to do is click here and I'm present and ready to learn instead of spending 10 minutes finding the right link, right? So we're repeating that information as often as possible in the places students actually need it. Then they will also record that synchronous session and post it later. This is the same course. That was week 7 we just looked at, and here's week 8. And you can see that you can use those headers when you're going to change the structure a little bit, because not every week is exactly the same in a course, right? So in this case, there were no assignments due. There is no practice and application. So they've changed the header to really just remind students, it's not a typo, I didn't make a mistake, you're not losing it or forgetting something, there's nothing due, don't turn anything in. You get a little break. You could also use that to say no assignments due, work on your rough draft, or nothing to turn in, you know, work with your group on your discussion thread. We can use all of those. These are all modifiable, and you can give those students that clear instruction. Now, some of you are thinking that's great, but my course doesn't have that structure of reading, lecture, assignments, right? Here's an example of one that is highly tailored to a much more unconventional course structure. So I'm not expecting any of you necessarily to have modules that look like this, but I just kind of wanted to show you how you can adjust and modify if you wanted to. In this course, this is just the structure that this instructor has always used in her face-to-face course. She has an overview, but then the very beginning of the week starts with a discussion about current events where students can post things they find throughout the week, but that conversation can start early in the week. They don't need to have done any readings to be able to contribute to it. Then, instead of having a generic readings page, she wants them to spend some time on the main textbook. And so there's a series of readings from the textbook as well as a quiz about the textbook here. That's the main theory in this course. Then there's a lecture video that the instructor posts, and then every week has a case study, and that might have additional smaller readings or something to watch, a webinar or some YouTube videos, and with an assignment and a discussion that are about the case study. So in this case, she wanted to draw their attention to all of these kinds of actions have to do with the case study, and the module structure reflects that. I mentioned pages earlier. If you had clicked through on those things within the module, this is the kind of thing that you would see. And if you download that template from Odie, this is what you will get as your blank starter kit, right? You can duplicate this as many times as you want. This is your place to group like sets of activities like readings or lectures or videos to watch together. And you can see that here there are spaces prompting you to give some explanation. This is your space to bring in your instructor expertise to set the tone and help students know, why are these readings put together? How do these readings connect to my homework or the things we did last week? You could just write a few sentences here. You could put in a short video that you make with your cell phone or your webcam, or even just do a bullet list. And then you can link the readings directly in here. And I know I saw earlier some of you are concerned about how to get students access to things like books and readings. You could just type the chapters if you think they'll have a paper book, or you could link it directly to something through the libraries. And you'll see the same kind of structure in the lecture here. We know from the literature on how people learn online that these kinds of organizational structures really help students know, what do I do with this file? what do I do with this video? Are there things you want them to focus on so that they're not highlighting every word they read? Like, are there big questions or comparisons you want them to notice as they read? These pages are the place where you can draw that out and help them engage with it more meaningfully.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so it's another time to reflect and plan on your own, not in the chat, but on your own. So these are 2 questions. You're welcome to pick one to answer. So what do you need to adjust your current Karman shell, if you have one, to best help students navigate the course? What are the aspects that or examples that you kind of want to consider? Or you can answer, what repeating module structure makes sense for your course? Or what kind of repeating module structure makes sense to suggest to those who you're supporting? Just take 2 minutes to take some notes on that. Okay, so we are right on schedule so far, and I believe we've gotten all the questions answered so far. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the second best practice, and that is about providing students with practice and application. Again, we're talking about summer courses, but this is true for any online course. So why do we need to do this? Well, students need opportunities to apply what they're learning, and they need to be able to do that in multiple formats. It cannot just be all high stakes exams. So we need to find a way in this online course to give them those opportunities to practice and apply what they're learning. What also needs to happen on the flip end of that is they need to get feedback, because that's how they're going to learn, right? That's how they'll know whether or not they're on the right track. They'll be able to see the flaws in their thinking perhaps, right? And kind of helps redirect. So we're going to talk a little bit about what are some of the ways to do that in an online course, and Sarah is going to share.
Okay, so most of you, when you were talking about your biggest concerns, were talking about student engagement. And I know that for a lot of us, when we're talking about engagement, we mean that opportunity for folks to have interactions, either with us, where we get to know them, we know their interests. We love those spontaneous questions and aha moments that we feel in a face-to-face classroom, or those moments where they're engaging with each other and the material and really like having those wonderful conversations where we maybe even just take a step back and enjoy watching that learning happen. And we want to make sure that we're building in not an exact translation of those moments, because we won't often see them. We might see some of those moments if we're using a synchronous method, but we can still design in intentionally opportunities for that kind of engagement with their work and to see their learning and to engage with those aha moments or how they're thinking and exploring. And so this is where we start to dig into activities and assignments. And we call that practice and application, right? Excuse me. So we want you to think about identifying core activities first. This is like the chances to practice with the content. I want to draw your attention to the distinction here between my favorite activities or the current activities I would use in a face-to-face course, or things that are really important, because they are really important. And you probably have most of you, really great activities you've been using for years or semesters. And we need to kind of go one step farther to essential or core activities, because especially for summer, you probably don't have time to get every single thing that you love into this course. So I know that's really, really hard to let go of some things, but let's start at least with the core things. And then if you have energy and space left, then you can add extra stuff. So thinking about the core activities, we might be talking about practice quizzes, self-checks, group work, any kind of homework that you've assigned, or those kinds of recitation activities, a reflection on an activity that you do, or actual activities where you are participating synchronously, like we are all now in Zoom. So whatever activities you end up deciding are core to your students' learning, we want to remind you that most of those can be accomplished using simple Carmen functional tools and Zoom. And we would encourage you to start there and get creative and use the resources we'll share at the end to develop those things using Carmen tools or Zoom, in part because of that learning curve Stephanie was mentioning for you and your students.
Sorry, hold on.
Because your students are going to be in multiple courses, and as soon as they get used to using, say, the quiz tool, the more quickly they'll be able to use the quiz tool in your class. The more used they become to using assignments and submitting assignments, the better work they can do for you. Again, we're reducing that cognitive load. The less tools you have to learn, the more you can tailor and adapt those activities well. But also, this is a key point, anything that's supported by Ohio State, they can just call the help desk, the service desk, and get support without bugging you. If you choose to use unsupported tools, they can do some really, really cool stuff. But if something breaks, you won't be able to access the service desk for help. You'll have to be waiting for that company or that app support to get back to you. And your students will be coming to you for those answers. We want to keep this manageable, and we don't want you to all have to turn into IT support specialists. So the more you can design now using those Ohio State supported tools, the less you have to know about how to fix all of the other external apps. There's also a consideration here about FERPA, and if you are using any kind of external, not Carmen or Zoom tool, you can't put graded work in those spaces that other people outside the university can access. So it may be possible to use OSU tools for your assignments and have them do stuff elsewhere. You know, if you want them to do a search on Twitter or be using different databases, that's fine as long as the thing they turn in for a grade happens in Carmen. When you're thinking about activities and practice, we want them to have opportunities to do ungraded or low stakes work before they do some kind of big assignment. We don't want to wait and make sure that we want them to have a sense of how they're learning and whether they've gotten what they need before those bigger assignments. So we're thinking here about things that might be just for participation or a self-check for a few points, like just try it. I'm not grading every single answer for right or wrong, but then they will know whether it's right or wrong. And then consider those ideas, the barriers for participation that Stephanie mentioned earlier. So if you're going to do something that's synchronous in Zoom, those of you who are used to doing a lot of active learning in a face-to-face class might really find a lot of use to do Zoom meetings and put students in breakout rooms into small groups and call them back, or to use the polling feature or the chat like we are right now. But you need to have a plan B in mind already for what students who can't join during that time or don't have fast enough Wi-Fi might look like. You are welcome to record that and have them download it, or have alternative ways to submit those activities. Or ideally, where at least some of these participation activities would be self-paced so that they could do it on their own schedule, regardless of when they're able to get access to that Wi-Fi. I want to show you some examples because I know a lot of you have labs or are used to doing active learning in your classrooms. Obviously, we're not going to be able to show examples for every single discipline or some of the more video-related ones, but I wanted to show you how the simple Carmen tools can be creatively adapted to do at least a fair amount of those core activities. So this is a GE course in anthropology. It's one of the global world archaeology courses, and they use the Carmen quiz tool to adapt their simple labs. So if you have labs that involve a lot of identification or listing or diagrams or predicting or analyzing data sets, you can adapt those using the quiz tool so that students see something and then answer a question about it. Anytime that your activity involves seeing something and answering a question and that same pattern over and over again, the quiz tool will do that. And we just want to draw your attention to the fact that even though it's called Carmen Quizzes, you are not limited to using this in a traditional quiz sense. What the quiz tool does is lets you create text or images. You can put videos here. You can link out to other websites or other YouTube videos. You can put in PowerPoint that they can download and add their own material and re-upload. So the quiz tool is really nice for seeing something and answering a question, which suits itself well to simple labs. Here's another example of using the quiz tool. This is a scaffolded activity. Ideally, at the end of this class, students are doing a research paper project where they will use the CIA Factbook as one of their main sources. And so the instructor set up these scavenger hunt activities in the early part of the course where they would go and explore a particular country on their own using that resource. So you can see here there's a link to that resource website that she wants them to use, and then there's questions. And so this is a chance for students to go and find material. Later in the activity, there are sort of more thought questions like, what do you think about this? Given these facts that you've determined, what would your analysis or your prediction be? It doesn't only have to be strictly identification kind of questions, but it helps them get familiar with that resource. You might also want them to be submitting these things using the assignments tool. So again, it's called the assignments tool. That doesn't mean it has to be a big high stakes paper or project. You can have them submit small point value participation things like a reflection paper. But we might also think about assignments as a way that students are applying what they know and showing you what they've learned. So most of us have several assignments, and the assignments tool is something you want to get familiar with. If you download that template that I keep talking about, this is what you'll see under your assignments. This is based on research around the transparent template idea, where we know that making all of these pieces clear to students really helps them know what to give us. This is even more important online than it is face-to-face because we don't have those opportunities to see confusion or to hear those casual misconceptions that students might have before or after class if we're in a classroom together. And it also has been shown to reduce performance gaps between underrepresented minorities, to help students who aren't starting with a huge online skill set come up and have some chance to know how to interact with these tools. And it will frankly, get you better work, which will reduce your grading load. It is so much faster to grade good work than bad work. So the more clearly we can explain what we want, the more likely you are to get good work. So you'll notice here, this is probably a lot more than you're used to giving students when you give an assignment, but you can put your learning objectives. So they are immediately seeing like, why am I doing this assignment? And they focus their energy on showing you those skills. The directions. What to include. This is where you put, 2 pages, 12-point font. I want 8 citations. I want you to use APA style, whatever those kinds of specific things you want them to include. And then if you're asking them to do resources, you may have a direct link to that database or to the Zoom channel where you want them to work in their group, or to the readings that you want them to draw on. Again, anytime we can reduce that cognitive load for them to go and find things, the more we focus on them learning and showing you what they've learned. And then finally, we have this academic integrity piece. This is very easy to edit. You just delete the things you don't need, right? If you want it to be open book, delete the no book. If you want it to be closed book, delete the green book. This may seem very simple, but there's plenty of research to indicate that just reminding students of our expectations clearly before they turn in their work reduces academic misconduct significantly. Again, if students are in 5 different courses, and for some of them, it's okay to take what they do in their group and translate and bring those ideas into their individual paper, they may not realize that you don't want that kind of collaboration or help. If you have a discussion where they're getting ideas or having questions answered, is it okay to bring those ideas in here? Or does this need to be something completely different, totally different topic? If they're revising a rough draft, can they use that previous work from this course? or from other courses in a series, or does this need to be a totally different thing? It's easy for you, pays off in dividends for that academic conduct.
Okay. I think Monica heard Sarah's description about academic integrity answered your question about how to use that. So basically that comes in the template and you just erase the parts, and the symbol at the bottom matches right along with the bullets. If it's not, make sure you ask your question again in the chat. Okay. So I want us to take a couple minutes to think about your plans for practice and application. Sarah gave us some really interesting, but not, I think, too overwhelming examples. And as you can see, that template kind of already gets you started. So you can answer one of these two questions. You won't have time to answer either. You won't be able to finish these. But the first one is maybe start thinking about which activities or assessments you currently have that need significant adjustment, few adjustments, what needs to be created, what needs to be dropped. You just want to take a couple of minutes to just start brainstorming, or you can answer the question of, is there anything you need to add to your assignment prompts or activity instructions, like we just saw, that you don't already have for this online delivery? So we'll take 2 minutes to do that. And again, this is just for you, not in the chat. Okay, so remember that we're just getting started today. So hold on to those reflection questions and planning questions so you can keep working at that. We want to know from you, is there a strategy that you've heard about so far, thinking about sharing your materials and practice and application? Can you share with us in the chat if you have an idea or one strategy that you're contemplating adding to your course? So just write that in the chat and we'll see what you've come up with so far. All right, so we've got academic integrity, we've got Karma rubrics we talked about before. The assignment tool is real, those templates are fantastic, use them. I've mentioned this before, I hate admitting this publicly, but I've always, as a consultant, sent people to the template, but I never actually used the template myself. So now that feels kind of silly to do. Yeah, and the idea of using quizzes for something other than quizzes, yep. Good, well, I'm glad you got some ideas. You've asked a lot of questions already, and looking at the time, we probably have maybe 2 minutes to just make sure there aren't any other questions for those first two best practices. And if we don't get any if you're still thinking about those questions, just write them and we'll eventually get to them. But I'll give you a little bit of time to ask any other questions about those two best practices. How do students feel about ungraded assignments as busy work?
So at least from the feedback that I am aware of from undergrad students, students appreciate opportunities to practice. Nobody feels good about paying a bunch of tuition money and spending a ton of hours reading or watching lectures or working on assignments and then not knowing what your grade is going to be until week 7, or going into a midterm really not having a good sense of whether you studied the right things or how you're going to do. Like, that kind of anxiety is toxic to everyone, and students are pretty self-aware about that. So even if you see some students may not choose to do ungraded activities, they appreciate the opportunity to practice and have a sense, get that temperature of like whether they're doing the right things. How am I doing in this course is important to them. But if you're concerned about it not being a good use of their time, you might make it for participation points. It can be ungraded and still count towards something in the course, just the way that showing up to class and participating actively in those activities counts for something in a face-to-face course. Give them that opportunity for 1 point, 2 points, 10% of their total grade across the semester. Whatever that participation way of thinking works for you, you can translate that to these activities as a group.
So there's a couple questions here that are really about like making decisions, like, should I do a major exam? You certainly can do a major exam. There's no reason why you can't. Should I use the discussion board in a way that's graded or not? Some of those questions really go back to what are your learning goals and how you structured the course. So I'm going to put a plug in at the moment, and I'll mention it again at the end, that some of those decision-making processes are not really about the tools themselves, but more about how you want the learning experience to be for students and how they connect to your learning goals. So consider connecting with the University Institute for Teaching and Learning consultants, because they can help you walk through that kind of decision process, or you are welcome to connect with the OD teaching support consultants, and we can also kind of walk through that more closely tied to the tool itself. So any of those things that you mentioned, does it have to be graded or ungraded? Those are choices that you can make, and it will all depend on the context around your course. So I'll give you those links here at the end with the resources so that you can connect with them for further resources. Okay, let's move on to engaging students in conversation and reflection, and we will make sure to get back to any questions in our next segment. So why are we talking about engagement? Well, one, because y'all asked us to, because that's what you're excited about, and also what you're worried about, and we knew that, we anticipated that, but that engagement in an online course is so critical. That engagement will happen through conversation and reflection. So it's important because students want to feel connected to each other, probably now more than ever. And those peer-to-peer interactions can do wonders for creating a learning community, which is much easier to do when they show up in class and have you, and you set the tone, and we've got this beautiful community. It's much harder in the online environment. It doesn't happen automatically. As Sarah said, just plopping up all of your stuff into a Carmen does not create community, and community is important to the learning process. So we need to build that into this course, because it will also help with student motivation and getting them just more engaged in the course. All right, Sarah, so let's talk about some of the main points and practices for how to do this.
Okay, so what we want to aim for as you're making these big decisions about how the course is going to go is to think about having some opportunity for engagement at least once a week. That means that this might be with you, where students are giving you something and you're giving them something back, or it might mean between students. So this is a little different from something that you do that only goes towards students and you're not really getting anything back. So some kind of back and forth. So some examples of easy ways to do this are to have a Carmen discussion. There are some simple best practices for doing an online discussion where you would post some kind of a prompt and then let the students respond. But crucial here is to include some structure or criteria in that. I'll show you an example of what you'll get in the template in a minute and some of our suggestions. But we don't want to just say, okay, it's Wednesday, discuss the readings, all 80 of you go. Like, that is not going to produce meaningful results. Your students will not enjoy it. You will not enjoy it. That's not a meaningful engagement, right? So we have to have some kind of structure about how to do this engagement. If you are considering doing Zoom synchronous sessions where they're going to participate, not just where you're lecturing at them, but some kind of participation. So the kinds of things you're doing in the chat, if they're going to be doing polls or giving you some kind of back and forth where they're engaging with your questions or your content, or if you're going to put them in breakout rooms to talk to each other, that would count as engagement. Then you could do that once a week or some weeks. Anytime you have an active learning activity, so that might be in a Zoom breakout room, or you may use Carmen to split them into groups and give them their own discussion thread. Work together across the week to produce some kind of artifact or some kind of assignment or product, a presentation, a set of questions, a set of summaries, whatever it is that you want them to do together. That counts as engagement with peers. Or you might have a back and forth with them, those of you who want to get to know them, who want to hear how their learning's going, or learn about parts of their interests or applications. You might consider doing a reflection prompt where you ask them to tell you something, if not personal, at least some reflection about what they're thinking about or how this is connecting with them individually. You can do that using an ungraded survey or an assignment. Regardless of how you're going to set up these engagement structures, these are not the only things you could choose. They're just the ones that we see most frequently and will be the simplest for you to get going. They're also things students are pretty familiar with, so that lessens that learning curve for them. Whichever thing you pick, again, we want to make it really clear that you're going to define participation expectations and offer that plan B. If this requires a Zoom participation, for example, what's the other way that you're going to have available for students who can't join you live in Zoom? And so whatever you're planning, those synchronous things, you want to always have that plan B planned at the same time. Don't wait until a student says, I work during that time, or I have my kids to homeschool all day, I can't do that, or I'm sharing one computer with 3 roommates right now and we have to take turns. Participation in group work means you might be setting some expectations for how long and how often they should be contributing to that board. If they're working in groups, are there different roles that you want them to take, or is it okay for everybody to sort of sort that out within their own groups? This is an example of the kind of thing you will get in that template if you download it. This would be, this is a filled out example, but if you downloaded this into your course or imported it, you would get these same headers for an online discussion. I don't need you to necessarily read this. I know it's probably really small on your screen, but I want to draw your attention to how much instructions are included in this template item. This is probably way more directions and clear expectations than you've given in an in-person discussion. If you are face-to-face in a classroom with your students, you're able to sort of wander between the desks if they're working in groups, or have that back and forth where you can say, I feel like we're getting a little off track. Let me redirect you with this question. Or we're only really doing a surface level discussion. I want to give you this probing question to go deeper. You have those opportunities to nudge. In an online discussion, you can still pop in and challenge groups or give that correction during the week. But the more you can set them up for success with those expectations ahead of time, the more substantive this discussion can be. So again, this is not just saying discuss the readings, go. Here we have, what do you need to do before the discussion? The context, like why are we even discussing this? And discussions ideally will be a place where there is space for multiple perspectives. If there's one right answer, maybe don't do that in a discussion because it's not going to go very far. But things where they can bring, reasonable people could disagree, or multiple theorists would be weighing in, or a life lived experience might be relevant, or current events might be relevant. Those are great topics for discussion. What do they need to do beforehand? Are there readings or questions they should prepare? How can they do their best work? What are some of those things you want to see in the readings? Should this cite the materials? Does this not need any citations? Should this connect to a previous module, or is this a fresh start? Those kinds of things. And then the responses. So if you're going to respond, you may want to mention what, some civility guidelines. We're going to critique the idea, not the person. We're going to use academic language or informal language, depending on what's appropriate for your context. Do you want them to cite or not to cite? Only if they directly quote, or is summarizing okay because you're only talking about one reading and it's understood? Make those things very clear in the expectations. And here's an example of the reflection survey. Again, this is not the exact wording you have to use, but this is what students would see. It has a little reason for like, why do you want their reflection? And then some brief discussion or brief directions on what they should include and how you'll be using that material. In this example, because it is a reflection, there's no wrong answer. And so just by turning it in, they get that participation full credit.
Philip had asked if you can briefly answer this now, why this reflection survey is actually considered engagement. Like what is the aspect of this that it makes this count?
Sure. Well, if students are giving you something and then you're going to respond to it. So if you just are collecting these into a vacuum and students never hear anything about it, that's not really engagement. It's just an assignment. But ideally, if you're asking them to share like personal things, you might write back to the individuals. Maybe not every individual every week, but across the semester, maybe you're touching base with everybody once or twice. Oh, thanks for sharing with me about what your career aspirations are. I wanted to do that when I was an undergrad as well. Or here's some links to those career opportunities for you. Or thanks for sharing that experience that you've had. I'm going to tailor some of the readings next week to bring in more of that interest. So you might write back to them individually for those of you who are missing or worried about missing that kind of back and forth with individuals. Or you might be kind of looking at this in the aggregate and responding to them as a group and saying, okay, I read your reflections. I see that for a lot of you, the videos aren't working because they're too long. And with your Wi-Fi speeds, this length of video is problematic. Thanks for letting me all know that. I'm going to shorten my lectures from here on out. So anytime you get something and there's a back and forth, it will count as engagement.
Thank you. Okay, looking at the time, I want to make sure we give you, we may have a minute for this, but what are some plans that you have for adding conversation and reflection into your online course? So 1 or 2 questions. Looking at week 1 of the course, what kind of student-to-student interaction makes sense to include? Or if you've already had an interaction plan, what could you adjust to make it more manageable for both you and your students? So just take a moment and write down and some thoughts about either of those. Okay, we're going to talk about our last piece here, and I think maybe now is a good time before people start to trail off here and leave us. There were a lot of links that particularly Queenie had put. I only put a couple. Queenie put a lot in there, and I don't want you to lose them. So if you want to kind of have that transcript of the chat, you can just click on those 3 dots next to file in the chat window, and it gives you the option to kind of download and save the chat. So that way you have it all. Okay, this last one is on instructor presence. We have about 4 minutes to cover this topic, but it's very intermingled with the other 3 that we talked about. So why do we care about this? Because students benefit from it. They benefit from your expertise, right, as the instructor, and they very much benefit from your presence, whether it's a verbal presence, a physical presence, right? They can see you, they can read from you, right? That connection is important. And that kind of presence sets the tone, and it sets the tone for the whole course. It sets the tone for what kind of care, right, is going to be given in this course, what kind of engagement is expected, and allows you to really kind of engage and clarify with students throughout the whole semester. So Sarah's going to share here briefly ways to do that in an online environment.
So this is my biggest takeaway for instructor engagement. If the only thing you can manage for summer is to introduce yourself with some kind of visual, find some ways to make time for that. The first time I taught online, I didn't have time for that. I only had a 2-week turnaround before the second time I taught online, and the only thing I changed was adding a text introduction of myself with a photo. And my SEIs for Instructor Cares About My Learning went up a full point with only that change, because students want to feel like they're learning from a human being. When Stephanie says that your presence and your expertise matters, she's not kidding. They don't want to feel like they are just buying an app and doing learning with a computer. They want there to be someone else on the other end. And again, we're not expecting you to create these high budget multimedia recordings, but if you can at least show them that you're a human being once, preferably more than once, but if the minimum you can do is this introduction in that first week, please try to find a way to do this. You can just do it with your webcam or a cell phone. That's fine. We have some resources on how to do those things. This is really a great way to just set that tone of like, I am here, I'm a person, we're in this together. You'll remember in those modules, we had those overview places. This is another place where you can do substantive engagement with your students by planning these weekly module overviews. That's a great place to put in some thoughts that are contemporary to this particular semester as you go along. What's happening this week? Make note of what happened last week with those real set of students that you have right now. That can be text. But you could also consider including an audio file or recording, again, a simple webcam video so that they see you once a week if you have that energy in your life. This is a great place to review what happened last week, not just in the content, but also like some themes you might have seen in their assignments or the discussion board conversations so that you can give that group level feedback. Or to talk about what's coming up next, big tasks, assignments upcoming. If things are glitchy, if the tech's not working perfectly, and it's not going to be, there's going to be glitches. There are going to be things that don't run the way you want. This is a great place to acknowledge that. And you might also use the announcements tool to acknowledge, hey, last week, sorry, Zoom crashed halfway through. I had wanted to get through another 10 minutes, but I think I'll just put the slides up. However you're going to handle those glitches, it's great to make that transparent to students in these places. You can also be present in those discussion boards if you're using them. We would encourage you to make some space for the students to use that for peer-to-peer learning, but you don't want to be completely absent. So maybe make a schedule to pop in once or twice a week to answer any unresolved questions, maybe use some questions to push them deeper, or just to keep on track of making sure that everyone is being civil and engaging in those spaces. Obviously, we want you to keep grading and giving feedback on assignments. If you are teaching a 400-person lecture, this is probably not the place you're going to do a lot of individual engagement. If you have a 20-person seminar, giving that feedback on the grading is a good place for you to do engagement. And then finally, just like we have office hours when we run face-to-face courses, you want to offer some kind of way to reach you during the week. And preferably Zoom office hours are a great way to do that. And just like in a face-to-face class, please do not expect very many students to take you up on that. But knowing you're there, knowing they could get a hold of you if they wanted you to, goes a long way towards setting that tone that you care, that you're available, and it really does help students feel like they're with a real person, even if they don't show up. This is an example of a responsive reminder announcement using the announcements tool. You'll see that there's a personalized message, a reminder, and also acknowledging some things that weren't going very well that week. And then this is just an example of a really simple video overview. I made it with my webcam on my back porch. My neighbor fired up his lawnmower about halfway through and I had to pause it. And the video quality is fine. As long as they can hear you and see you're a human being. This took me about 20 minutes. I just uploaded it to YouTube and linked it directly in there. So the whole thing probably took me less than an hour to make. And we got a lot of feedback that they really appreciate seeing that and hearing your voice.
Okay, I know we had a question about this. I'm going to wait, Maria, for just another minute here. I want to make sure I give you time to reflect on your instructor presence. So do you need to amplify, right, your presence or adjust it in some way from what you would do normally in a face-to-face course, since most of you have not taught this class online? So what do you need to do to amplify or adjust that presence online? That could be the amount of feedback that you provide or doing that announcement. So just take 1 minute and think through what are some ways. All right, we're just at a minute here. So what is one strategy that you feel fairly confident that you can implement effectively? That is in particular around instructor presence and then the engagement piece. And this is where we'd love to see your responses in the chat. So what's one strategy you could fairly confidently implement? The introduction video and summary video. That's fairly straightforward, quick, good. Any others? Office hours is an easy one, yes. Good, so we've got kind of a variety of things here. So I'm glad that you feel fairly confident. And remember that we're here to support you, to continue to help you think through these things. All right, we've got discussions and we've got an amplifying presence, so great, thank you. All right, now I know Maria had a question and we have just a couple, like 2 minutes to answer questions specifically about engagement and presence. Do you see the question, Sarah, that Maria put down? She's teaching a massive team taught course. She's just a few comments above. And she wants to know, so it's a team taught course. It does offer special challenges, and the instructors who are most present often become responsible for others' participation or their lack of. So it puts them in jeopardy from students because the coordinator may not actually have as much authority over their individual instructors. How do you deal with this situation? Is there anything that we were talking about in terms of engagement or presence that we could offer her, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of an extreme example, but there are many of you that might be working with TAs where you're all teaching different sections of a lab or a recitation, or maybe you're teaching a GE where there are multiple people in your department teaching other sections, and you want to have that kind of consistency, but also have those relationships between the individual instructors, right? So I think one thing to keep in mind is working as that team as early as you can to get on board on some of those core things that everyone's going to approach with a continuity is a good place to start. And then also looking for the places to create a sense of the individual instructor with their students whenever that's possible. So if you have your own section or a breakout group, Zoom is actually pretty cool for that kind of thing because you could send one instructor with 20 or 30 of those students to a breakout room to have some time where they're seeing that individual person, even if that's just in the recording, for example, or having individual people make their own video weekly updates, right? So that there's a group of students who see that person. I know that we've also seen team teaching work really well when they take turns doing the video lectures. Or make it really clear in the discussion threads who's going to be handling the discussion this week so that students feel like they're getting to know at least one or two of those folks. And again, if you have something that's really specific like this that you want to think through your choices or possibilities, a consultation is a really great place to kind of dive into the like, how did this work? What parts work in person? What parts don't work in person to get that formalized feedback.
Yeah, Maria, but also a couple other people teaching these team taught courses, and you're the coordinators. And I would say what's going to advantage you for the online courses that you have those 8 expectations and they have to be met. So that sense of like instructors can go off and do what they want is not allowed in this online environment. So in some ways it allows you to have a little bit more of a, it really is a stick. You have to do that. So we can talk to you more directly about how to manage that with, like Maria has 30 instructors. It's a massive course. So in our last few minutes, I want to make sure you know where to get those consultations. So you have a few links here. The first is those consultations with the OD teaching support team. So there are a number of us who are here who are excited and ready to help you out on an individual basis. You just contact us through the link that you have here, and then we'll get that response and very quickly we'll connect with you and set up a Zoom meeting to talk with you. That same kind of consultation is done by the UITL consultants, and probably the best way at this point to connect with them is emailing them and asking for a consultation, and they will also do a Zoom consultation with you. If you have a question about a tool like a specific, like this is not working, or Sarah said the discussion can do X, Y, and Z, but when I click it, it doesn't do that thing. That would be best to go to our Carmen support team, and that's writing them an email at carmen@osu.edu, and that will create a ticket for them to actually help you work through some of the tool issues that you may have. UITL also has communities of practice that are going on currently. There are 7 of them. That may be a nice space for you to join a group that is a little bit more informal, where they're talking about their own situation. So for example, there are some around for senior lecturers and or senior faculty, I should say. And there's also one for, I think there's one on labs, right? And actually, if Kay is still here, I'm sure she'd be happy to type them into our chat. But there are 7 of them, and it's just a way to connect with each other. And each one is run by a staff member from UITL, and some also have an OD staff person connected to them. And then the last resource is through our resource center. And that's at the resourcecenter.od.osu.edu. And there you will find lots of videos to help you and tutorials to help you think through how to use those tools. And that link was provided a couple times in by Queenie in the chat. I just want to end in our last moment with a few key points. So creating engagement with and between students, you can see, is going to be really important. Providing that practice, application, and reflection can be done in lots of different ways, and we have to think through how do you give them those opportunities. Really, we want you to think about how to make this manageable, both for you and your students. Your students were not probably expecting to take an online course, and you were probably not expecting to teach an online course. So with a few weeks we have left to plan, let's think about what we actually can accomplish. And then the Keep Teaching site is still currently the hub for resources. Queenie also had a couple of links there. And then please make sure that you ask assistance. We are here to support you in OD and UITL, and the libraries are still here. The Student Life Disability Services unit is still around, right? All of us are still here to help you. So what we're gonna do at this point, if you need to leave us, you are welcome to enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I will thank you for helping us think through how to plan your summer course. And then we'll just stick around for maybe another 5 or so minutes and see if there are other questions that you may have that we haven't gotten to yet. So if you're leaving us, we want to thank you for joining us today.